Hey, it's Matt Kelly here, and I am here with Dan Rollman, the founder and president of RecordSetter.com. Dan, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Man, it is so good to see you. You guys are obviously kicking some big goals. We've seen you on Jimmy Fallon 5 or 6 times from memory. We've seen you on the NSFW show, on the Twit Network. But I'd like to scale it back a bit to start with and just talk about the history of Dan Rollman, how you, sort of the pathway you took and how you ended up where you're at now.
Sure. It's been a life adventure to reach this point. You know, I always say Record Setter began when I was a 10-year-old boy and I got my first Guinness Book of World Records, and I just fell head over heels in love with world records. I was just inspired by all these people around the world who were, you know, pushing the limits of human achievement in all these amazing new ways. And I, from a very young age, kind of had this dream that someday I could set a world record myself. And it didn't really matter what the world record was in. I just loved the idea of being a world champion, and that just seemed cool. You know, billions of people, and the idea that you could truly be the world's best seemed cool to me. So, you know, my obsession with world records continued. I looked into setting a Guinness record when I was in college. Tried to impress a girl with ravioli eating, but she wasn't impressed, and I realized I'm a very slow eater. My previous professional career was in advertising, so I worked as a copywriter, creative director for years in advertising, which, you know, I always enjoyed it, but I felt like on some deep level I didn't want to be an ad guy my entire life. And I started doing world records with some friends at a festival in Nevada called Burning Man, which is this huge annual festival, 50,000 people camping in the desert. And, you know, my friends and I said, let's create a camp where people can invent their own world records. And it was really just a simple hobby. We were just looking for ways to keep ourselves busy. And we wore these yellow jackets, and people came up and we said, set any world record you want. And, you know, long story short is it just kept growing and growing. Like, people were really creative. They were inventing world records, like the fastest accordion rendition of The Devil Went Down to Georgia. Wow. The most blueberries fit on a belly button, like all kinds of super creative stuff that you would never see in the Guinness Book. And, you know, a vision started to come to life that, wow, why not create a much more open, democratic place for world records? You know, Wikipedia was a big inspiration. It was revolutionizing the encyclopedia overnight. So I met my co-founder, Corey Henderson, through his wife, and, you know, we bonded over world records. He's a tech ninja, so, you know, it became just kind of a part-time hobby that turned into a full-time obsession, and now we're a young company of 10 in New York City.
Wow. And that initial process where you went from, hey, we're onto something, people like this, to having a live website, did you, was that sort of like, oh, Corey will just jump on it and get started and we'll throw together a website and see how it goes? Or was it much more calculated than that?
You know, I'm a first-time entrepreneur, and I've never built a website before. So, you know, I could, and maybe someday we'll write a book or books about this process, because I was really green getting into this whole thing. Like, all I knew is we had 50 pretty cool videos from Burning Man, and I wanted to put it on the internet and let people around the world get involved and upload their own world records and try and beat these world records. And, you know, that's like a nice, easy vision, but I had no clue how hard it was to build a website. I had no clue what fundraising meant, so I didn't know how to raise money for a company. You know, it took a lot longer than we had imagined, just because, you know, you realize if you sit down and start building like a website, it is a complex beast. So, yeah, I mean, it was and continues to be like a much bigger challenge than I'd ever realized, but, you know, one that we enjoy tackling daily.
Yeah, it's easy to say, and we've all done it. Like, oh, we'll get a few videos and throw them online, but the back end that enables that is a pretty complex situation. So I'm not surprised you've got Corey and probably a team of tech ninjas who are constantly working on the infrastructure. That's cool.
And it's just, you know, in advertising, I was making TV commercials, so you're used to working on a project and it has a finish line. And so you work on something for 2 or 3 months, and then you send it off and it's done, and you've washed your hands and you're starting your next project. Like, you build an internet company, it is never ending. I mean, it's like a kid. Like, it just needs more and more time and energy, and this thing's breaking and that feature has to get built, and, you know, it's a monster.
Yeah, well, you guys have had heaps of like really strong growth. But I want to go back to the point where you talked about fundraising. You mentioned you'd never been through that process. You guys have raised money, I know. I've sort of gone a little bit of research, and I know that you've gotten some fun. And from one particularly well-known investor as well, from what I could see. How did you go through that process?
Yeah, Corey was more versed. He had been part of some previous startups, so I was really just starting to read books on how to start a business, and I didn't know the difference between an angel investor and a venture capitalist. And there was a Guy Kawasaki book I read, which I recommend to a lot of newbies, called The Art of the Start, which really just gave me the fundamentals. And then I was just reading a lot of business books about the journeys that other entrepreneurs had had, and from the Zappos book, it's amazing to read that story and how the company almost, was on the verge of disappearing. Reading about, there was a great book about eBay, and you try and get involved in your local community. I was going to, a lot of the New York tech events and meeting other entrepreneurs, and realizing that running and starting a company is not a science. It's just and you're continually trying to improve on it. So, but I mean, in terms of the nuts and bolts, we put together a deck and basically said, I mean, we knew it was a cool project. We knew if people were going to get into this, it was going to be a cool website, but that means really nothing to an investor. Like, they want to see how you can turn this into a profitable company. So we put together a deck which showed our, preliminary visions of, here's how we think advertisers are going to get involved with RecordSetter. Here's how we think we can get into the realm of books. Here's why we think a TV show makes sense. Here's how live events can be turned into money. And then, you take this vision, you meet with a bunch of investors. Some of them give you blank looks and think you're, out of your mind. And you kind of just keep knocking on doors until hopefully you find somebody who shares the sparkle and says, wow, like, that is really cool, and this thing has the opportunity to be huge, and we believe in it and believe in you.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, clearly that's the most successful path to take, because it's worked for you guys. So I suppose the learning from there is, if you want to do it, do it. Go do it. Start the project, go through the process, do what you think is right with the knowledge that you have, and keep iterating as you go. So it's good. It's interesting.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, I remember having a pivotal moment in terms of the company. I had quit my job in advertising and I was freelancing, and I wrote a screenplay, and I was working on an art project, and I thought culinary school would be cool. And, I mean, I think, like many of us, I just had a lot of ideas running through my head, and I wanted to try and execute 20 things at once. And I think one of the lessons that I've learned is the importance of putting things on the shelf, and knowing when to when you have your big idea that just keeps coming back to you. And I remember talking to a dear friend of mine, Mike Kennedy, and was explaining to him the idea of the website. And the moment he got it, he thought it was just for Burning Man people. And I was like, no, man, this is going to be a website that lets anybody set world records. Yeah. And he just said, he's like, you always have lots of interesting ideas. That's a really big idea. You need to make some sacrifices in your life. You need to put a lot of things in your, in your world on hold, and you need to focus on that thing. And it was sage advice, and really essential in us getting this far.
Yeah, amazing. So let's talk recent times. So started URDB, had clearly had the investors jump in, had some good success. You've done a recent rebrand earlier this year to RecordSetter. So now it's no longer URDB, it's now RecordSetter.com. What was the process that you went through to do that, and why was the motivation?
Yeah. Like you say, when we launched the company, we went with the name the Universal Record Database, and our URL was urdb.org. We were on the cusp for a long time about whether we wanted to make this a for-profit company or a non-profit. Again, we were looking at Wikipedia more than we were looking at Guinness, for example, and kind of figuring out how can we build something that's going to, have tools for our community and be involved. And so we liked the bigness and kind of the clinical nature of the name, the Universal Record Database, how official it feels. Yeah. And we thought a 4-letter URL was going to be simple, kind of like IMDb. Um, and so, yeah, so we chose that, and we chose it as .org. And, you know, over the first couple of years, I mean, it just became clear that, well, I mean, there were a couple things. A lot of people thought we were part of Universal, like Universal Music and
Yeah.
Universal Films,
Films,
the
yeah.
Universal for people. People just thought we were a music company because if you just say my company is called the Universal Record Database, nobody's going to be thinking immediately, oh, world records. It sounds
Yeah.
more like music. The URL was challenging for people to remember. And, you know, and then we were also ultimately realizing like we, you know, we were doing live events and developing a TV show and, you know, our new book, which is out, the idea of calling it the Universal Record Database Book of World Records, it just sounded like a mouthful. And
Yeah.
so, you know, we've always said we envision this as like a 50-year project, and like this is a company that is, you know, even though we just hit our third anniversary, we're really still in our infancy. You know, we enough people had kind of said it's hard to remember what your name is, and we also just felt we were becoming something bigger than just an online database. So, you know, we worked with a branding company here in New York. We did a big exploration of names, and now we're recordsetter.com.
Cool. That's awesome. That's awesome. Um, and prior to the name change, and I assume on an ongoing basis, you've been looking at bringing in external clients rather than covering the site with advertising, like so many others have done in the
Yep.
past.
Yep.
And we all know the reasons as to why you don't necessarily want to plaster your site with advertising, but how have you gone through the process of identifying who a good client would be, sort of building out a campaign for them linked in with the Record Setter community, and then
Yep.
sort of how do they see the value from that? How do they assess that value?
Sure. Yeah. So I think from the beginning, we've recognized that there are opportunities for brands to use our site in manners much more interesting than just buying a banner ad at the top. And just from our company's perspective, like we don't get 100 million monthly page views. If
Yeah.
we did, and we could just put some banners at the bottom, and that was enough to pay the bills, you know, we wouldn't be, we wouldn't necessarily be against it. But you know, I always use an example of a record like the fastest time to open a bag of Skittles and sort them by color, which is featured here in our new Record Center Book of World Records. So, you know, right after we launched the site, somebody just set that record. It wasn't, Skittles wasn't involved. That was just like their vision of what a fun, creative record could be, and it was a hobby that they had. And then that became a competitive category on the website. And so now you've got all these people in different countries who are going out and buying bags of Skittles to see how fast they can open them. And so, you know, there's this organic evolution of a new competition that involves a brand. So, like I say, my background is in advertising, and you know, my mind instantly says, well, that's like that is a really new type of very sticky, truly interactive advertising campaign, and you know, that is the core of the model of the brand partnerships that we worked on this far. So, you know, this past summer we did our biggest partnership yet, which was with a gum company here in the U.S. called Stride Gum.
Yep.
Their campaign is all long-lasting, so we worked with their ad agency. We came up with 100 long-lasting world record challenges, like the longest time for two people to volleyball a balloon back and forth with their heads. And we built out a custom channel, recordsetter.com/stride. We built a custom tab on their Facebook page, and they have 2.5 million Facebook fans.
Wow.
So they just got involved. You know, there was a new long-lasting world record challenge every day, and they put up a $500 cash prize for each winner. And we ended up seeing in 3 months' time over 1,000 UGC videos sent in. So, you know, those are huge numbers, and you know, I think that model starts to just use the Record Setter platform in you know, in a really interesting manner. And I think our community is into it also, right? Like, oh, cool, I love setting world records. It's fun. It's creative, competing against all these other people. And now there's a cash prize, which is like a nice bonus. And you know, it just felt more seamless of an integration than yeah, just putting on ads.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that makes a lot of sense. And just on the community, do you ever sit back and are you ever amazed at how engaged the community is? Because you guys have built a community of people, and I look at it on Facebook particularly. There's some really intense record setters. There's guys there that have set tens to hundreds to even a couple of thousand records, are on it all day, every day, always talking about it. They're all friends. Do you ever sit back and just look at it and go, wow, this is crazy, look what we've created?
Yeah, I mean, it is magical to watch this community forming, and I mean, you yourself, as somebody who's set some records, I mean, I love watching these international competitions happen. Like, I love that you and Dave are competing against guys in the U.S. and Canada to hold the world record for the longest high five.
We're getting that back, by the way, Dan. We're getting that back. We've got a plan.
The guys in Toronto, we were just with them, and they're working on it as well. So,
ooh, okay.
National High Five Day. I think you guys should all go for it and see what happens.
Oh, there you go. Oh, that's a good idea.
April, I think.
Yeah, done.
But I think I always say, like, the kinds of things that I'm into are not likely ever going to be recognized by the Guinness Book, and we're realizing that we all have our own quirky hobbies, we all have our own quirky interests, and there's just so much stuff out there, and it's just nice to see these people who perhaps have been working on their hobbies or developing their skills in isolation. A guy like Brian Pankey is a world record superstar. He holds over 2,000 records. I know you know about him, but he lives in a small town in Illinois, and he's a world-class juggler and performer, and it's really amazing that now he has a space to, like, show off what he's amazing at, and also be challenged by others who are going to try and push him back, and then they can chat in our forums, and they can become Facebook friends and dialogue on our Facebook community. So yeah, it's wonderful to watch all these relationships form.
It's amazing. All right, Dan, we're going to wrap it up in a second. I want to talk about the book quickly. The
Sure.
RecordSetter Book of World Records. Yeah, that's right. What made you guys go, yeah, it's time to have a book? Was that always a dream? After seeing after going through that Guinness process and knowing that you've got this company now, this website, this community, it's time for a book. Was a book always on the line? Did you always know that was going to happen?
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say we always knew, but I would say it was always a dream.
Yeah.
It certainly is interesting that publishing is sort of old media, and we're in new media. We're going to old media to kind of create growth in our website. But I think, I'm just personally a big fan of print, and obviously things are changing at lightning quick speed. But I think there still is a space for a fun reference book like this for, kids, teenagers, adults who, just want to read something entertaining on a Sunday afternoon. And also, a big challenge that we have is just getting recognition as a new governing body for world records. Obviously, one of the other world record governing bodies out there started 50 years before us, so there's more recognition of their name. And getting this book out, and we just came back. We just did a 16-city tour across North America. It's just great for us to get out and get people realizing, that there's this new home of world records, and that instead of just reading somebody else's book on an annual basis, like, wow, world records are a hobby. World records are something that I can set myself. Like, we just say we're changing world records from something you read about to something you set yourself, and I think the book is just a great tool to get that message out there.
Absolutely. Well, that is amazing. I don't even want to talk about anything else because this has been sensational. Dan Rollman, RecordSetter.com. Yeah, anywhere else you want to plug? RecordSetter.com, Twitter.com/
If you're still looking for a holiday gift, or anytime. I mean, this book is great for kids, teenagers, adults who just like fun stuff, and I hope you'll set some world records.
Absolutely, absolutely. There you go.
Yes.
That's the longest high five right there. But we've got to get it back. We've got to get it back. We've lost that since you started publishing and going through that process. this US couple came in and they came and destroyed our previous record. So it's back. It's
Yeah.
on. It's on.
Yeah. And, you know, I would say at the end, I would just say, like, being an entrepreneur, again, is an extraordinary tough challenge. So I would say if you're going to jump into it, like, first of all, find something that you truly love and prepare yourself for more work and, you know, late nights and lost weekends, like loving your thing. But it is truly like the most rewarding professional chapter I've had in my life by far. And I had an old boss who said his business advice is that everybody should try and start a company at one point in their life, and I think it's advice to be passed on.
Amazing, amazing. Dan Rollman, thank you very much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Anytime. It's great to catch up with you.